Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Policy Committee. Councillors are attending in person following the expiry of the Coronavirus Act regulations, which permitted online meetings. So we're meeting in a socially distanced layout in the council chamber, with a small number of seats provided for the press and public, which aren't on camera. So I'd like to let anybody at home know that the public gallery is full tonight and there's standing room only. Most of the officers involved this evening will be joining remotely via Teams, as well as Councillor McElroy, who is unable to attend in person. I'll invite Councillor McElroy to contribute to the discussion, but he cannot vote on any of the agenda items because he is not present in person. There is a live stream available through Microsoft Teams, and a recording of the meeting will be uploaded to the council's website afterwards. Okay, so that concludes the announcements for the day. So do we have any declarations of interest? Wonderful, thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting. Are these a full and accurate record? Excellent. I'll sign those off in due course because they're right next to me. Item 4 then, petitions and questions. No petitions, no public questions, but one councillor question, which is from Councillor McElroy, but I understand he has asked whether Councillor White could ask it on his behalf. So I'll ask Councillor White to ask the question of the day.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor McElroy's question is on living hours employers. A decade ago, Green councillors proposed that this council pay its staff a living wage, and in 2013 we urged the council to become an accredited living wage employer. As we hopefully emerge from COVID lockdowns and restrictions, we call on the council to also provide security of hours alongside security of wages. Everyone should have the right to know how many hours they will work next week, to be paid if their shifts are cancelled, and a basic minimum of hours if they want them. Does the lead councillor agree that all Reading Borough Council staff and all staff employed by companies with Reading Borough Council contracts should have those rights? Will she ask the Chief Executive to make RBC an accredited living hours employer and make sure the same can be said of all companies that hold contracts with RBC going forward?
Thank you, Councillor White. Councillor McEwen.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I should have tested that. Sorry about that. Yeah, no, this one's. Thank you, Chair. I thank Councillor McElroy for the question. The council is already a real living accredited employer. The Living Hours programme is a new initiative from the Living Wage Foundation aimed at providing a practical solution that employers can adopt to help provide security and stability to lower paid workers to help them to make ends meet. The key commitments are decent notice periods for shift with at least 4 weeks notice with guaranteed payment if shifts are cancelled within this notice period. Also a contract with living hours, the right to a contract that reflects actual hours worked and a guaranteed minimum of 16 hours a week unless the worker requests otherwise. This will be underpinned by a new Living Hours accreditation programme run by the Living Wage Foundation. Officers have asked to meet with the Living Wage Foundation to understand fully the implications if we were to become an accredited living hours employer, both for the council and for the companies that hold contracts with the council. The Living Wage Foundation are unable to meet with officers until the end of November. I will therefore provide an update to Policy Committee on this issue at a future meeting.
Thank you, Councillor McEwen. Councillor White, did you have a supplementary?
No, thank you, Chair. I shall wait eagerly for the response at a future meeting.
Wonderful. Thank you both. And that's the end of, if I could get you to turn your mic off, thank you. the end of councillor questions, which would take us then to item 5, which is decision book call-ins, and there are none. So it takes us on to item 6, Gypsy and Traveller Transit Site. And I think I have Darren Inston to present from the officer side on the magic box. There's Darren.
Good evening.
In your own time, Darren.
Thank you. The report sets out the progress made towards developing proposals for a transit site for the Gypsy and Traveller community in Reading. In addition, the report seeks approval towards progressing the scheme towards a planning application submission. However, I would also draw the committee's attention towards the issues raised in the report, especially around the Environment Agency and detailed emergency planning zone. We also have Mark Warringham here, should there be any questions relating to planning policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Inston. Can I just clarify something before I open up to the floor? I think there's an error in 5.1. It refers to the Gypsy and Traveller travelling show people houseboat dweller accommodation assessment, which concluded, it says in the report, identified 10 to 17 permanent pitches, which is correct. And then the report says 10 transit pitches, which is incorrect. It identified 5 pitches, which is 10 caravans. Is that correct?
Yes, apologies, that is correct. It should have said 5 transit pitches for 10 caravans.
Thank you very much. OK, I will go to Councillor Barnett Ward, who's indicated.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to thank officers for the work not only involved in this report, but also the considerable amount of work that has been undertaken to get us to this point. This has been a very long process. I believe it started before I joined the council. Some of you will be very familiar with previous attempts to get this site and to fulfil that provision. And what we have is not the end of the process by any means here. Even if policy committee approve this tonight, we go to planning, even if it gets planning permission and we bring this site, it's not going to solve all the issues that we currently have with illegal encampments in Reading Borough, but it will help. It will be a better situation than they're currently in. The police will be able to use increased powers, and we will have a legitimate place for people to stop in Reading, which will be a really significant milestone in how we manage this part of our community. But we still need, and as Councillor Brock has pointed out, we will still need a permanent site. This will fulfil our need for transit pitches, very slightly over, but we will still need a permanent site, and we don't have land within the borough to do that. We don't have a large enough area of land. We are dependent on our neighbouring authorities agreeing to work with us, which we very much hope they will do, and which officers have been engaging with them about. So I don't propose to go into it much further. I just want to do a little bit of expectation management of what it is that we're trying to achieve here, and not get people's hopes up too much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barnett Ward. Councillor Stevens.
I'll just walk around the stage clutching it. Try this. OK, so yes, similarly, expectations, I think we do have to manage. I think it'd be quite wrong to put out the fact that we're now finding a solution to this issue problem, and realistically we know it's a long way down the line. That's absolutely supported. I'm aware, as many have, the long journey we've been on trying to find somewhere, and it's been immensely difficult to find a suitable permanent site. For many people, I think the issue of a transit site is almost more important, and the frustration we've all had of these incursions and the mess it's left behind, and the antisocial behaviour and all that, really upsetting for people. So I think if we can have somewhere where you can then say you must go to this transit site, I think that'd be enormously helpful. A couple of questions is the issue, and I see the difficulty of this, of the more vulnerable site versus basically a highly vulnerable. Can we not, that and also the issue about the detailed emergency planning zone, can those issues not be resolved before it gets as far as a planning application? Because when it strikes me there must be legal views as to which category they fall in. And I take the point about officers saying, well, we think they can go into the more vulnerable category, but if the answer is legally they don't, then frankly we can't move forward at all. So we might as well find that out before we even go into the effort of a planning application. And the other, frankly, is at 9.1 is the cost, and it says it's going to cost 2.54 million if we're successful to actually establish this site. Well, my basic maths are for 7 pitches, that comes out as 368,000 a pitch. You can buy a reasonable sized house for that, I think. Even if we go for 14 caravans on those 7 pitches, 181,000 per pitch. Is that right? That's even an extraordinary amount of money to lay in some water, some electricity, and some hard standing.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. I'll bring Mr. Inston in at the end of the debate, if that's okay, to reflect on your questions. What I would say, I mean, it is normal that where there are objections from other agencies that they're resolved as part of the planning application process rather than necessarily something you can square off in advance, because there's a difference, of course, between an in-principle objection and objections to substantive schemes that are proposed. So it's not unusual to be in that situation. Councillor White.
Thank you, Chair. With no permanent or temporary sites for the travelling community in Reading, the situation is currently bad for both the travelling community and residents. Recently, we've ended up with many occasions where the travelling community are in a park without basic facilities such as toilets, bins and running water, and that's not good for the travelling community or for residents. As other councillors have said, the actions in this report will definitely help with the temporary pitches, and so Green councillors will be voting for these. More work is needed, as people have acknowledged, and we'll keep supporting action to resolve these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor White. I have no other indications. So if I go back to Mr. Inston to pick up the points raised principally by Councillor Stevens, especially around the financial implications and the legal objections, or the statutory agency objections, I should say.
Yeah, in terms of the capital costs, the scheme would include up to 8 buildings because it's not just hard standing. So under a transit pitch, you also provide a building per pitch to offer some amenities, so it includes toilet and washing facilities, and also the sites we have available, significant attenuation will be required to overcome the Environment Agency's objections in terms of flooding and so on. So that's why the costs are reflected in that way. I don't know whether you would like to bring Mark in to discuss some of the planning policy in regards to the highly vulnerable or more vulnerable.
Why not? Mr. Warringham, did you want to come back on that?
Yeah, thank you. I think as far as we're aware, this question hasn't been tested at appeal. The question has arisen in relation to some perhaps similar uses, such as seasonal accommodation for seasonal workers, but it's not quite the same thing as a transit pitch. So getting a definitive answer on this before you put in a planning application isn't really going to be possible. And the Environment Agency tends to only really engage with the issue once the planning application is in front of them, because they have resource issues and will prioritise the statutory role in planning applications. So I think it's not going to be possible to have an absolute definitive answer on this, but officers' view is that transit accommodation should fall within the more vulnerable rather than highly vulnerable. That's certainly our interpretation of national planning policy.
Thank you, Mr. Warringham. Thank you, Mr. Inston. Takes us to the end then. So if I move a vote on the recommendations before us in paragraph 2, section 2, not detecting any dissent, is it okay to say that's unanimous? Wonderful. Brilliant. Thank you all. Thank you to officers. Moving us on to item 7, Brighter Futures for Children Limited Reserved Matters. I assume I have Kate Grafer to introduce. There she is.
You do, thank you, Chair. So I will keep my introduction very brief. This particular report is coming to Policy Committee, as is stated, as shareholder for Brighter Futures for Children. Underneath the Articles of Association, there are a number of reserved matters that come to Policy Committee for final decision and endorsement. And one of them is around the appointment of a non-executive director to the board of Brighter Futures. A report had come to policy previously, outlining the fact that there had been some assessment of the board composition and skills that had been completed from a Brighter Futures perspective, and that it was deemed that it would be prudent to look to appoint a new non-executive director for two reasons. Firstly, whilst the skills across the board were deemed as meeting the needs from a company perspective, it was advantageous to look to extend further, especially in the arena of education. But secondly, all of the current non-executive directors of the board have the same end date for their term. So from a succession planning point of view, the company were keen to appoint somebody else with a different term expiry, so that they had an ability to be able to manage succession. As a result of a recruitment process, which was done alongside Councillor Pearce, Calvin Pike has been recommended to look to start as a non-executive director, pending decision as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Director. I have an indication from Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Kate, for the introduction. I can obviously say a little bit more about Calvin and the process. We had a very good field of candidates and a thorough interview and recruitment process, which, as Kate mentioned, I was very happy to be part of alongside the other Brighter Futures directors. Calvin will help balance the board of Brighter Futures, as he has a wealth of educational experience from a range of different bodies, including, but not exhaustively, from the DFE and Ofsted. And in his interview, his passion for education and wanting to help the most disadvantaged in society in particular was something that really shone through, and that will fit in very well with the priorities of Brighter Futures and obviously hopefully everyone in this chamber. So I'd like to welcome Kelvin to the board, obviously if ratified, and I look forward to working with him.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. I've got no other indications. Anything you wanted to come back on, Assistant Director?
Nothing for me, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. In which case, I'll move the recommendations in section 2, and can we agree those unanimously as well? Yep. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you, Assistant Director. Thank you to everybody involved in the process. Moves us on then to item 8, which is the exclusion of the press and public, because our remaining items are for the closed session. So I'll move the motion as printed, and can we agree to that? Wonderful.